officially the party conference in 1980, and I joined the party because of their attitude and practice on the national question. I was in an all Chicano organization for many, many years, and long story. And it was the way they conducted themselves in Texas that led me to join the party. So, and I love it.
So now we're going to turn the meeting over to Teresa, who will start off the discussion, and then will be her decision. Do you want to give questions?
Yeah, so I'm going to give a little bit of historical little points, and then maybe we can have questions and answers and comments and things you might want to emphasize on. I want to say that I worry about immigration in the party. That's the main thing that I'm worrying about and work on, because I'm Mexican. So, like the issue of immigration is very much part of our DNA, and I'm one of the Mexicans where the border I didn't cross the border crossed me, meaning that I was born in Texas, and, our family roots are there. Long before Mexico was stolen, right? So that's my interest in immigration. But the party has been and has always historically done everything it can, to support the immigrant struggle. And so I want to talk about it in terms of the history of the party, but also how do Marxists look at this question, right? Because we are fighting to break the capitalist system. I'm assuming that all of you in this room believe that unless we destroy capitalism, really humanity is not going to go forward, or won't go forward very well, right? And so, we have to have a Marxist explanation of every phenomenon, whether it's, immigration or racism or women's oppression or capitalism at a dead end. And that's how I'm going to look at this. So, the issue of migration is nothing new, right? It's not about under Trump or under Obama or Bush or anything like that. Migration is very much part of human history, right? For thousands and thousands of years, people have migrated, whether it's to search for food or to survive or to go to warmer climates. In the case of some, it was to conquer frontiers, to colonize new territories, or others, it was to escape war zones or other political turmoil. And still others, especially when society became a little bit more richer, we migrated to look for adventure and excitement and new opportunities. So in a very broad sense, the history of the world is a history of human migration and settlement. And it's complex. It's not just today the worker trying to cross the desert to come into Mexico. It can be also the mass migration that happened in the right after Reconstruction, the mass migration of African Americans from the south to the north to escape the lynchings, to escape the super exploitation. And it can even be, especially more in my day, I think, although I don't know if that's true. Young people can correct me. But in my day, a lot of us escaped more regional, more conservative areas and moved to bigger cities like New York or San Francisco to come out, to sort of be in a space where you could be an LGBTQ person in a more open atmosphere. So that's a kind of a form of migration. But today, with the decline of capitalism, right, we know that, I hope that you've studied or read, our articles on capitalism at a dead end, that capitalism is at a period in history that it has never been before. You lucky kids, that you're having to face the decline of capitalism in a way that it's never been. And this has created a wave of forced migration. And I really think that it's important for the party as a whole not to just be thinking about forced migration into the United States, which is of course very key, right? As revolutionaries, we have to show our solidarity and organize and all that, but we have to think of forced migration and be paying more attention and do more in my opinion, and I think the party as a whole shares this opinion, is just a question of how and when. But we have to pay attention to migration worldwide. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the migration that's going on in from the south to the north to Syria and Africa, parts of Africa to Europe and so forth. And I think that we have to look at this forced migration that is something that is really, I believe, an epic humanitarian crisis and one of the biggest humanitarian crises of our time. And we have to understand this as Marxists, and we have to, as Leninists, we have to try to, do some work around this. So, we all know that, capitalism is a for-profit driven system, that they're going to do whatever they can, to make profit, including shutting down factories here and going to Haiti or Indonesia or elsewhere to produce the goods that they want to produce at a cheaper cost, right? And they don't care if workers are laid off here, as long as they, get cheaper goods, they're going to go. So capital, we see, is free to flow anywhere, right? And pro-capitalist governments around the world carry out all kinds of policies, tax evasion and all kinds of things that allows capitalists to go abroad unfettered, and yet a poor peasant from Chiapas or from the Philippines, or a domestic worker from the Philippines, has to go through all kinds of channels in order to get a job or to cross the border, right? And this is what leads to the super exploitation of migrant workers. Now, I want to. We talk a lot, and we have been talking a lot in the paper and so forth about immigrants, but we have to move as a movement to move away from that word. And it's still, immigrant is very much part of the vocabulary, right? So it's hard to stop using it. But if you see what the definition of immigrant is, it's a worker who moves from place to place to do seasonal work, right? I'm sorry, that's a migrant. Whereas an immigrant is a person who chooses to leave, right? And so, more and more, this is forced migration because of economic policies or because of U.S. imperialist policies, such as that in Honduras that forced migration from there. And we have to find ways to incorporate this new phenomenon. And I think the Filipinos actually, once again, have come to a new way to describe it. And I've seen in their literature and in their propaganda that they now use I am/migrant. And I think that's a great way of start bringing in, forcing people to ask, well, why are y'all, doing it that way? And it's a way to talk about how callous and how super exploitive the situation is for workers right now, right? And the phases of immigration has changed. In the early days, in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, we used to talk about no human being is illegal, right? Which is absolutely correct. That is true. No human being is illegal, but no worker should have to have documents. Why do you have to have documents anyway? You might need documents, to show your ID or to collect your Social Security. But why do you have to have documents? Why should we respect those borders, right? And more, the movement is moving towards right now at a higher level, and is saying that the undocumented in this country should have permanent residency with all rights, full rights, right? And why should they have to be a citizen if they don't want to be a citizen, right? They don't have to be. And once you cannot talk about, it's a liberal lack of a class analysis to talk about an immigrant without talking about what causes them to migrate. And more, the movement has, is for someone who has followed the immigration issue for so long, more and more the movement has become more mature, more radical, more class conscious. And now, even nonprofits and others like that talk about the roots of migration, whereas before they didn't, right? Very interesting. That's a very important development. I want to also say that, we know that the reason why, I want to talk a little bit about the modern war on migrants. Now, especially in the early days of the movement, and even in 2006, a lot of the people in the immigrant rights movement and their advocates would raise placards like, "We are all immigrants," and we had to do a lot of education. No, we're not all immigrants. Some of us were brought here in the slave trade. Indigenous people were here already. Mexicans were, part of Mexico before the robbery. So no, we're not all immigrants. It was a very liberal, ahistorical, point of view. And it was really important, especially if you wanted to draw connections and have links to the Black community, and you wanted the Black community to come and be supportive and be part of the immigration struggle. It was important to have those conversations. And within 2 or 3 years, you stopped seeing, those placards. Because I remember there was a lot of discussion about that. In the early days, in 06, you saw a lot of U.S. flags, and that stopped also. Workers started bringing their own flags from Mexico or the Caribbean or what have you. And a lot of it in the early days was because the nonprofits were controlling. Not that I have anything against nonprofits, they provide a service for people in need, and you don't want to trash them, and a lot of good people work their butts off at nonprofits. But it's another case when they dictate the politics, and that's what we need to try to get away from. And the immigrant movement in particular, or the migrant movement in particular, I'm still used to immigrant. The migrant movement in particular has always been extremely radical, historically, right? It's radical because of the super exploitation that they face that makes them angrier, whether, and as a Black or brown immigrant, you face, the extra oppression of racism and that sort of thing. And also because many immigrants come from countries where the class struggle is at a much higher level. There's much more revolutionary movements, more struggles against the governments, and deeper understanding of capitalism than some workers have had here in the past. And so they come with all kinds of rich attitudes and have always played, a revolutionary and struggle orientation in this country. I mean, May Day was born in the 1800s as a result of immigrants and their struggle, right? And it was, at that time, it was Irish, Jewish, Italian, immigrants who played a really revolutionary role and helped to win, the 8-hour day, which, is something we're losing all the time. So the anti-immigrant or anti-migrant war that we face today didn't start with Trump. It actually started to intensify under Clinton, and it, became, worse as capitalism declined. I go back to this article that was written by Harvard scholar Samuel Huntington, who basically wrote the ideological theses for the white supremacist attitude that's very much part and parcel of the anti-migrant war that we see. Where he, let it be known that if the U.S. did not take care of the migrant question, that the very fabric of the white Protestant society, as he described it, was in danger of being lost. And, chastise Spanish-speaking migrants for not learning English and this sort of thing. And it was, the beginning of what we see today. And, it failed to ignore, the conditions for migrants. A few years ago, in 2006, for example, the AP published this report that an undocumented worker dies every hour in this country. And whether it was through falling in vats of it was actually vats of shit. I remember reading that, and I remember thinking, shit, like, wow. I mean, just like, what a terrible way to die. Or construction workers, an undocumented worker dies every hour in this country. And this was the reality that the ruling class, of course, didn't write about, and Huntington ignored, because they still wanted and have always wanted a controlled, vulnerable labor population that they could exploit. So let's bring it up to Trump. Trump has, of course, taken the anti-immigrant rhetoric to another level. And, it's not because he is a bigot or racist or misogynist or an idiot, all the things that he is, but it's because of very much tied to capitalism at a dead end, right? And whether, Trump lasts or not, the rhetoric against immigrants has taken hold, and it will only be the working class that will defeat it, right? And it's part and parcel of society right now, because of capitalism at a dead end, and they need workers to be divided. That's why they have this. They need us to be fighting with each other. They need, to blame immigrants for losing jobs and so forth and so on. I want to note that it's very interesting that the Border Patrol Council, which is not a union, but is their organization of the Border Patrol agents, it was the first time, Trump presidency was the first time that the National Border Patrol Council endorsed a president. And the words that they wrote in their endorsement are exactly the same words that Trump was repeating and talking about on the campaign trail. And they are racist and vile. They're Gestapo type, attitudes. And they're the ones who are now going to the courtrooms and to the houses and to places of employment and stopping people of color and checking them for their papers around the country. So things have, definitely intensified under Trump. But, we cannot forget that the greatest deportations that happened under a black president, under the first black president, and under a Democrat, which was, of course, Barack Obama, that has deported more people than any other U.S. president. So it doesn't matter whether it's a bigot, misogynist like Trump, or a Democrat. These what's fueling the anti-immigrant hysteria is, of course, the decline in capitalism. So I think I want to stop there. Maybe if people have questions or other points that they want to raise, I'd be glad to do that. I do think it's important for us to talk about, I heard you mentioning that y'all were going to have a Workers' Defense Council, and we'd love to hear about that, and also about the situation of immigrants in Baltimore, which I'm not that familiar with. I think it would be important for the party to know that as well. So.
Just so that, I don't know how we're going to do it, Rasika, but in case anybody on the live stream they can type the question in and say who they are. Did you want to do the question part? Do you want to monitor that, or did you want me to? Whatever works for you.
Whatever works for you.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll kind of do it jointly. If anybody has comments or thoughts or questions or even an answer to what Teresa raised.
I guess something I'm curious about in particular with Baltimore is that our city doesn't entirely control the police. It's like a state agency, so I think that's one of the issues surrounding the whole question of like what an actual sanctuary city is, and like how they can enforce that. And I guess I'm wondering, if you know of examples that go beyond our definition of sanctuary, that is just like the police don't help ICE, like if they're like more radical ideas about what sanctuary can be.
Yeah. Well,
A couple questions?
yeah, okay.
A couple other questions before Teresa answers? Go ahead.
Well, I read a really interesting piece that explained that this particular woman argued that sanctuary cities was actually part of African American history, and that it was, you know, the struggle to protect slaves and the Underground Railroad, that, you know, so that the roots of sanctuary cities are tied to that, and I found that very interesting and very appropriate. I think that, you know, it's one of those, the idea of a sanctuary city is a demand that we should fight for, but it's a priority of those who think that the city government will actually do that, right? And you have, like in Boston or some cities in LA that declare themselves sanctuary cities, and Trump is threatening to cut federal funding for them. And we should oppose that, absolutely. But we just have to understand that really it's a false illusion. You know, in New York is supposed to be a bastion of liberalism, right? And there is no such thing as stopping ICE from picking immigrants up. The problem is that they're now turning from one of the big parts of the Trump administration's policies, and not just Trump. This happened under Obama as well, but back and forth. Trump has released all kinds of regulations that now further criminalize immigrants, so that whereas before Obama would have this policy that they call catch and release, which I find very offensive. Sounds like a fish, you know, like a worker's a fish, you know. But if they caught someone who had come here illegally without papers, out of status, they would put them in the system, but they would let them go. And so that worker could, you know, go on and try to lay low and go underground so that they wouldn't be deported. Now, Trump, the ICE agents are now allowed to pick you up and send you back. You can be deported now if you are in the system for a DUI or for a traffic violation, that sort of thing. That makes you a criminal. And it's one of the examples that when the movements are more mature and larger, and we, you know, when we were able to do this, there's a crying need to link the immigrant struggle with the mass incarceration struggle in a genuine, real way. You know, a lot of people talk about it, but you know, the movement's not quite strong enough yet, you know, to do the kind of work that we need to do to link those two struggles. You know, there's a lot of information to show that the same corporations that are profiting from jailing Black and brown youth for smoking weed or what have you are the same corporations that are making huge profits from the detention of migrant workers today. And so if the families and friends and communities of both communities organized, you know, in massive ways, you know, imagine demonstrations at the prisons, at, you know, federal agencies, you know, we could really shut shit down, you know, which is what we want to do. And it'll come, you know. I think the desire to link the migrant struggle with the Black struggle is there among a lot of organizations. It's just a question of resources and maturity of the movement, right? So we're not going to knock sanctuary cities, you know, because it is a you know, it's a game, but the reality is that there is no such thing. You know, New York is supposed to be a big sanctuary city, but broken windows policing stops a migrant or a Black youth or a Latino youth, you know, or any youth, you know, from jumping the turnstile or what have you. And that for an out of status person jumping the turnstile can lead you to be deported now. So I don't call that sanctuary at all. And so the movement has been very, the left movement anyway has been very key in exposing that, in the movement.
Personally, one of my issues with like African sanctuary for me, it should just be you are safe. You know what I mean? Like the idea that we're fighting that in some places you'll be okay is like the same thing as saying in some places we won't exploit our workers. So fighting for a sanctuary country is a little bit counterproductive.
Yeah. Also in Los Angeles, where the movement is a little bit, or California, where the movements are a little bit stronger, there's more activity. Actually, sometimes the churches and the faith-based movement are able to do a lot more than the left can do, right? Just by nature of their resources. And there are, but we have to work with them. It's important to work with them because they have resources that we don't necessarily have. But like in California, the faith-based movement has been strong enough and has done enough fundraising that it has actually bought houses that they can house migrants. So it's becoming an underground railroad in some way. And I think, as Marxists and as revolutionaries, we want to support those efforts. If there's a need to buy food, the need for migrant workers, like the need for poor workers, is great. And you want to tap onto all kinds of resources in order to provide the services. So, that's what I mean by not attacking Sanctuary City, but, trying to take the struggle further. That's not enough, and that it's not real.
So, what you said about undocumented workers, one dying every day. I recently finished my law school thesis, and my paper was all about workers who died because their employer's business, whatever, and they took those ludicrous steps that it was obvious to get somebody killed. Right? And part of my paper was this case in New York at a construction site where this Ecuadorian, 24-year-old Ecuadorian undocumented immigrant got sent into a trench that was short, and he knew it was unsafe. This guy had 2 kids, 24 years old, running. And the trench, they kind of hammer on for hours of weather to pull him out. The trench collapsed. And he died. And honestly, there's a million of those.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just incessant. And, in this paper, I proposed some criminal law that would put certain employers and business officials in jail that literally never got passed anywhere. But so my question is, outside of destroying capitalism, like, what do we do to protect these workers in the meantime? Because the steps these employers take are just so obviously dangerous. They don't give them high voltage gloves and working on wires. They don't give them harnesses when they're in elevator shafts. They don't have safety nets. And I just really want to know what people with a Marxist perspective can do in the meantime to try to save some of these lives.
Back on you, Andrew and Rasika, and then Muhammad, and then Teresa. Andrew might want to say something about.
I was going to talk about, because I think that there's an interesting divide in the capitalist class on labor being able to cross borders. Maybe there's that divide, or maybe there's their rhetoric and then there's how they actually feel. Because we know that the capitalist class desires to freely travel over borders and move to where labor is cheapest, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think that to a certain extent where it can decrease wages, they do want some movement of labor across borders. But I think maybe it's like a rhetorical tool. It's more like a rhetorical tool to sort of push a sort of xenophobic, strict borders kind of line in order to divide the working class and to sort of get one sector of the working class to fight back against lowering of wages. I'm kind of losing myself here, but I don't know. Maybe someone could shed some light on it, like what like.
What you pretty much mean is just like how some progressives will want immigration, but it's more so for the sole purpose of like cheaper labor. Whereas others are more like no, because
Not even progressives. Some
Rosika? And then Mohammed.
Oh yeah, since we talk about Los Angeles, Los Angeles is still not a sanctuary city.
It's not, or it is?
They're calling it a city of sanctuary, so they actually working word. So just like Baltimore, I don't know if
We're
there's
welcoming
actually
city, not
really
sanctuary.
sanctuary cities in this country because they actually hide behind the words. And yeah, when they pass, they're specifically calling it city of sanctuary. So yeah.
Mohammed?
I was going to give my opinion on Alex's question. I mean, really the only thing we can do until, start throwing bricks at windows is just striking. Like AT&T's 3-day strike, or Verizon's strike last year, because I know that annoyed the shit out of me, but it worked for them.
Yeah.
I mean, to a certain extent, boycotting services, like how they boycotted the bus service back in, I couldn't tell you the year, but they did. I mean, there's only so much we can do but hurt the capital of a company that has awful practices. I know, I'm with you. I mean, as soon as we can bring torches, I'm right there in that boat.
Teresa, you want to interject before we keep going with questions?
If we waited for capitalism to die, we wouldn't be fighters. We wouldn't be revolutionaries. We have to fight for everything that we can, including better laws. I think it's the contradiction is when you count on that as the only thing, and there have been people's lawyers, right? And we need them. We desperately need people's lawyers. And a lawyer that, in our time, we had lawyers like William Kunstler or Ramsey Clark or, I don't know, Roger Wareham. Lawyers that were so grounded in this Lynn Stewart. My God, And I find that there needs to be some, we need to hear more from, progressive revolutionary lawyers, that are with the people, that are fighting for laws. I think it's fine to put together a struggle for a law, as long as it's grounded in the struggle, as long as it's grounded in, getting community support. You have the workers that are affected, part and parcel of it. I think it's ultra left when you sort of ignore that struggle. And on the other hand, we're not moderates, we're not reformists. We're only going to attach ourselves to a struggle like that or an issue like that when there's a struggle. When we can rally workers, around something like that. That's when we do it. And the more that migrants know that there are people fighting for them, the more solidarity they feel, the more they'll get in the struggle themselves. May Day was an example of how, struggles ebb and flow, right? In 2006, we had millions and millions of workers come out for demonstrations, not just once, but like 3 times that spring. There was millions in the streets, right? And many people thought that the demonstration this year would be as big as that or close to it, and they weren't. They were very small. And migrants did not come out in record numbers or in large numbers at all. And it's an ebb and flow. And so when things especially are ebbing, when things are low, it's especially important to use tactics like that. As long as, you don't get lost in it.
Before I call on you, Mohammed, there's Patricia and Leon and Audrey and you all want to, or Audrey, want to raise a question or comment?
I guess I would like to know more about the organization, the organization you mentioned earlier and what they were doing in Texas.
When I was in,
Yeah,
or
like what you said you liked what they were doing there.
what the party was doing then.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's actually a great story.
Anybody else before we hear the great story? Okay. You want to-
Well, I mean, I was active in the student movement, you know, and was organizing like farm worker support and Chicano, you know, organizing to get Chicano students to campus and Chicano teachers. We've lost a lot of that, but we didn't have Chicano studies and all that stuff. And I was involved in that, and then I got involved in Destiny the Party, and that was a really mass party that really challenged the Democratic Party. And it was following the leadership of the Black Panther Party, but for Texas. In other words, Texas is very reactionary, very conservative. And so, you know, putting together 2,000 or 3,000 brown people under the same roof was pretty fucking revolutionary back then, right? So that's what I was involved in. And we actually were organizing to get people to register to vote to support elections. We ran a mayoral candidate, a candidate for governor of Texas, and all of that, and it was pretty radical, you know. It wasn't socialist, it was just a struggle for self-determination, right? So some other parties would come to the Chicano movement, Chicano meetings, and would lecture about how only socialism will free Chicanos, right? And try to sell their paper. Workersville Party members came and asked, how can we be helpful? And at the time, we needed them to help us organize to register to vote, people to register to vote. It wasn't until later that I found out how much they hated doing that, but they did it, right? Because it was sort of, you know, we're not there to tell you what to do, you know. So because one of the parties of the left was so fucked up on the national question, you know, to the point where actually one night the Chicanos beat them up in the parking lot. And it was kind of cool, you know? Because they were just really screwing up, you know. But I thought all leftists were like that, right? So anyway, then COINTELPRO happens. It destroyed Destiny the Party. Of course, we didn't know that at the time that it was COINTELPRO. And then I read the Communist Manifesto. Somebody gave it to me, and I was like, oh my God, you know, and realized that it wasn't just about Chicano oppressions, but I was still, you know, couldn't leave the Mexicans, right? So then the Shah of Iran came to San Antonio, and the group that I was in was an all Mexican group, and, you know, we had a community paper and that sort of thing, and didn't really know much about Iran, but knew that if the U.S. was protecting him, that he was a bad guy, right? So we were opposed to the U.S. bringing the Shah of Iran to San Antonio. And we found out there was Iranian students in the city. They went on a hunger strike to protest the Shah. The Klan called for a demonstration. Workersville Party sent national leaders to organize a demonstration. And the thing that they did, they were full-time and all of us worked. So they took the assignment of writing the flyer for the demonstration against the Shah and against the Klan, right? And they brought it to the office the next day, and the flyer was like totally a flyer for New York City. That's how we saw it. Like, people don't talk like this, and it was about imperialism. You know, this is 77. It's not like today, right? It was very different. And it was about imperialism and the ruling class, and, you know, and we're like, no, you don't talk like that if you want to get people out. So they rewrote the flyer with no problems. They were very respectful. So that was the first thing that impressed me. And the second thing that impressed me, well, actually three things. The second thing was that the city council called a ban on all protests because of the heightened, you know, Klan and all that. And the party advised us to defy the ban, that we had a right to march, that it was our, you know, right to assemble and right to demonstrate. And I was like, oh my God, that's so radical, you know, defy the ban, you know. And so I loved it. And the final thing was that the Klan was attacking us, you know, leaving messages on that little box they used to take voicemail. Left messages on the voice machine, and they were, you know, attacking us and threatening us. And then they threw a brick or a rock in the office, because we had an office, and, you know, wrote some threatening letters that we're going to kill you, all that kind of shit. And Workers' War Party members came the next day with bats.
Oh.
Tom Soto gal. And I was like, okay, this is a group I want to be with. Because by then I had read about the Bolsheviks, you know, and I thought, okay, so here are the Bolsheviks. And so I really dug it. I really dug it. And, you know, like, they weren't adventurous. They weren't stupid. They were respectful. And I just, you know, so I just loved it. And they invited me to the conference in '80, and that was Larry Holmes' Billy Gate talk. Billy Gate, remember Billy Gate?
No.
Okay.
Carter's brother.
Huh?
Carter's brother.
Yeah, Carter's brother,
okay.
the Billy Gate. Anyway,
Oh.
and I realized that they were not, you know, that they had people of color leadership, which was key for me at the time, and still. And then, so I joined the party then, and the group that I was in sent out a letter telling everybody that I had sold out to the whites.
Oh, no.
I know, it was very bad. It was, yeah. So anyway, so that's my story, and I think everybody has a story like that, you know, especially back then.
Not selling out to the whites.
What?
I haven't sold out to the whites yet. It's not gonna happen.
Any other questions?
The whites are better. Young whites are a lot more advanced. They really are. I definitely concluded that.
Andrew, and then Archer. Oh, Archer first. And anybody else who hasn't spoken yet?
I have a sort of basic definitional question off any grand theoretical questions or statements. I'm just wondering if you could expand on what broken windows policing is.
Well, it's the policy in New York that they claim that crimes like so-called crimes of poverty, like breaking windows in communities or urinating in the streets, you know, things like that, are policies that help make New York a better city. And of course, it was in fact policies that led to mass incarceration of Black and brown youth, you know, jumping turnstiles, you know, that kind of thing. So I thought it was really cool how the immigrant rights, the youth movement of the immigrant rights movement in New York, which tend to be more revolutionary, more radical, you know, really, you know, targeted the broken windows policy as part of the immigration solidarity, and that was important.
Andrew?
So I wanted to, I guess, just ask about workers' defense committees from people who have a more historical perspective or have an idea of like sort of what the larger political goals of it are. We talked about it at our last membership meeting. And we sort of laid down a couple of basic points: defending strikers, defending people who want to unionize their workplace, and doing some more proactive things like advocating not just for sanctuary cities, but for non-cooperation with ICE, things like that. And I kind of just added holding employers accountable for dangerous work conditions and things like that. But I wonder if other people have more perspective to add.
Go ahead, Ollie. Teresa will answer that from the New York perspective, because it dovetails on Alex's question. I wanted to say a little bit more because I think the Workers' Defense Committee proposal and concept is like key to answering part of what Alec raised. Not all of it, but for instance, just being very concrete. Right after the first day without an immigrant, there was a woman and then later another person who were fired from the Blue Moon restaurant. Now, for a lot of reasons, the migrant community, though I got to tell you, in Baltimore, we're always like six years behind New York and other places, and LA in terminology. So even the immigrant movement here. So if you say that, they don't know.
No, I know. That's
Yes.
that's why we have to
Right, do both. I
Yeah,
like
we
that.
have to do both. Yeah, absolutely.
But at any rate, they decided not to move on it. But let's say we get our defense committee going, and we have this like paper that we had this pledge to bosses and businesses that you've been put on notice. And we went to all the businesses in this area, Joey, myself, and Rasika, and we gave out this, well, we had a letter that was signed by quite a few people telling them if you touch a hair on anyone's head, we were going to retaliate in our own way. But if we had that committee set up, we could have gone in and done direct action. I'm not even so much talking about being arrested, but just going in there, sitting in, boycotting that restaurant to the point where that employer would be forced to take their worker back or lose their business, especially in a lot of service industry where you got a restaurant that you can target. You can win something by people being organized. And not just in terms of the migrant question and racism, but even, for instance, there's this terrible setup, and I don't want to go into a big, long, detailed point on how the Democrats sold the $15 an hour minimum wage bill down the drain. But you know what? I mean, a big mass movement can force a legal change or a law change. But at the same time, when you can't go that route, if you have workers and oppressed people and poor people organized, you can do it by going into a company. Like, let's say we go to Plank's business and we sit in and say, unless you guarantee these workers that they're going to get paid a livable wage, we're not going to stop our torture of you, or we're going to go to your house, we're going to do this and that. In other words, wage and on-the-ground direct action kind of campaign. COSECHA, which is a new organization, one of the things that we liked that when we were in some of the meetings is that they sort of have a similar philosophy about it. They're asking for complete, what's the terminology? Permanent residency. But they don't want to go the route of always asking for a few little amendments to a bill. They figure that if they can organize another strike. So I'm just going on a little too long. We haven't figured out the whole thing. That's why on the 25th of June, and also talking to Andrew, we're going to start fleshing out some concrete ideas of how we could get a defense committee, a workers' defense committee going in this area, even if it's the embryo of it. Not the same as the anti-fascist committee, which is more thing directed against the fascists, but maybe even somehow connecting the two together where we're working on issues that affect the immigrants, but also the other sections of the oppressed community here in Baltimore. And this was like a start, this little piece of paper and getting people to make this pledge. But the long-term goal is to have the community so organized that if somebody is evicted from their apartment, that we can stop the eviction. It's nothing really new. It's just, how can you say it, how energetic, how committed we are to doing this. Because I think everyone shares this commitment. If we say we're going to do something, at least this is true in Baltimore. I don't mean it's not true in Baltimore. We do it. Like you say it, do it. Like mean it. Like if we're going to give out the free food on Friday, we don't. We got it. We can't disappoint people. But anyhow, I just want to say that because that's some discussion that comes June 25th. But it really will be up to the whole group to kind of flush out how we're going to proceed with it. But the whole idea is to build a working class movement that can do that. Because, if you have one room of your house that's burning down and you don't respond to that, then the whole house is going to burn down. And the whole working class is imperiled by that. But, I know New York, you all might.
No, we are doing that. Before I get into that, though, I have to say that part of the reason why I think the Workers' Defense Committee is going to work, whatever, I'm not sure what we're calling it in New York. We've had a couple of meetings. I think it's Workers' Defense Committee as well. And I prefer that the whole party nationally use the same word, committee. Yeah, because I love it when all the branches are doing the same thing. I just think it makes it stronger. So we sort of tested the waters on May Day with it, and the younger comrades are the ones who are feeling it the most. Want to do this, and I just want to add to what I said earlier about how I think that I worry about starting something like a Workers' Defense Committee for the very reasons that Sharon said. You go to a flyer to an event and you're telling the workers we're going to defend you, and then they call you and you're not ready for it. Shame on us. That's not the kind of leftist we want to be. So it's hard. But we actually got 2 calls from May Day. One of them was a worker calling in Spanish about they all called in sick on May Day, and they wanted to know what to do. And we helped. It was just a phone advice, and we didn't get a call back, so I think it's all okay. And then we got another call from a young woman, I think she's young, who wants to organize a union at Fresh Direct. And so, this is a very serious thing, and it can't just be the party. We have to be in communication with some of the unions who want to be supportive, and that way we can sort of do the community support, help organize on outreach or get pickets or protest, do that sort of thing. And the reason why the party wants to do that is because, the only way we're going to defeat capitalism is if we grow as a party, right? That we're not doing it just to grow. We're doing it because we want to be in the struggle, right? And we want to make advances for the working class. But in that process, is that bad?
No. Should I go check?
Yeah. Sarah.
Oh, I was just saying, we don't usually hear gunshots.
I'm all for fireworks. It's almost 4th of July.
It might be fireworks.
I don't think so.
I don't think
I don't think so.
I don't think so. You're gonna hear something, so.
Let's hope it was somebody from the other side. I mean, the other side.
I know.
Well, guys, who wants to walk me to my car?
What was I saying?
Those are fireworks.
That sounds like
That's
All
fireworks.
right, guys, what's up?
Yeah.
That's a win for the workers.
Oh, so I know what I was going to say. So we get this call from someone who wants to organize a union at Fresh Direct, and let's say it pans out because it's still in talking and phone stages, but that person comes into the office, our office, right? I mean, somebody who comes into this office or our office in New York, you see big pictures of Mumia, out of Syria, et cetera, and if that person comes back, then you might be recruiting a real class fighter, and that's one of the reasons why we want to do this, both to fight for any advances that we can for workers, but also if in the process we can raise somebody's class conscious, well, what more can you ask of us, so that's sort of the goal, in addition to everything else we're doing, because Trump is bombing Yemen and Syria every day. That's an issue. Venezuela's in danger, very much in danger. And if we lose Venezuela, it's a real setback for, the Latin America left and for the working class struggle in the Americas. So, we really have to turn our attention to the working class, and that's one way. And if in the process too, we can find other ways to strengthen the solidarity work with migrants even better, I think I'd be remiss if I don't talk about a little bit about the international issue. I don't know how much y'all have been reading about or seeing the pictures of migrants who, die in the waters as they make their way from Libya or other parts of Africa or the Middle East to Europe. It's like, I mean, it's like, you know, how the workers are not throwing bombs everywhere. I don't know, you know, like, you know, how you can't be so angry, you know, with what's going on. And I was reading this article about Roma and Russian children in Sweden who have been there, you know, like were born there or came there as very young and are now teenagers who, because of the threat of deportations and the status of their parents and their families, a disease has developed, an illness has developed where these children basically collapse and fall asleep for, you know, months or years, you know, and they basically shut down. It's called an apathy. It's called the apathy, which I think is a misnomer, you know. And, you know, it's like, it's just one of many tragedies that's happening. You know, the number of mothers or wives or fathers who will never know if their child died in the sea, you know, or at the border here, you know, I mean, I really feel that it's a humanitarian crisis that the working class revolutionary left has to pay attention to and give it, you know, more attention. There is not enough worldwide attention being paid to this. And I think that the left movements in Europe and the United States in particular have to start talking to each other to find ways to show solidarity. I mean, you know, years ago we used to organize a lot of delegations to Yugoslavia or Iraq, etc. And I think that we need to get back to that. You know, we need to show, you know, that we're with the workers of other nations, you know. And I think that's really important for us to not lose sight of. You know, in other words, we want to do our local work, but we also want to, you know, do more international work.
Are there another show of hands? People want to make a comment. Is there a way that we can check if anybody?
Yeah, we can.
Just check if anybody has a question that's on the live stream.
Yeah, no questions.
As far as they have.
Okay. You were saying earlier about you talked about changing the language from, you know, immigrant to migrant. I've been noticing so much of, like, especially when when Trump was up to his BS, like, people would say, like, immigrants make America great, and there's this very leftist view of immigrants. Like, I had never really, when you put it that way, of, like, not everybody who immigrated here, like, came there by choice. Is there anything more that we could do than just, like, I don't know, in our verbiage, or, like, I know that you said the thing about immigrant and migrant. What are other ways that we can, like, show solidarity, or
Yeah.
I don't know, not to whitewash that subject?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
I think it does. I mean, I think it's okay if an immigrant wants to say, or some group wants to say, immigrants make America great.
Right.
We're not going to say that. We're not going to say that because America's not great. You know, it's just not. You know, and if they you know want to say that, we're not going to throw down their sign or anything like that at a demo. You know, but if you can try to get into conversation with someone, you know, it's helpful to say why. And so I think that's one thing. I think talking about no borders in the worker struggle is very important right now. It's easy to talk about. It's not like a left slogan at all, I think. You know, you can even say, maybe you don't want to say capital has no borders, neither should we, but we can certainly say corporations have no borders, why should we, you know, that sort of thing. And I think more and more immigrants are moving towards, like Cosecha, to the demand for permanent residency, you know, with full rights. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And kind of like in conversation with other, I don't know, liberals or leftists, like, I don't know, I guess you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
Just to add another dimension to the idea that everybody
the wrong idea that everybody in the U.S. were immigrants. I think there's this misconception that the early white settlers who mass exterminated the indigenous people were immigrants, or they were working class in some sense, but I think they weren't, right? They were either straight up capitalist class, or they were capitalist class aspiring, and their entire labor and means of making money were based on exterminating indigenous people and enslaving everybody else.
Yeah, I saw a tweet about that one time that said settler colonialists aren't immigrants.
They're not immigrants, they're settlers.
I think also something that's important to answer your question is, you know, we must avoid looking at, especially if you come from, if you're not a person of color, right? We can't look at immigrant or the migrant struggle from a patronizing point of view, like the poor immigrant, you know. And part of understanding that that's not what it's about is knowing that if they're setting up checkpoints for migrants right now, today, then tomorrow they're going to be coming for you. And that is part of what's going on. There's this criminalization of migrants that cannot be allowed to be getting away with, because it's part and parcel of raising wages, you know, against fighting the criminalization of workers born here. It's part and parcel of the Black Lives Matter movement because of incarceration, because of racism. And it's part and parcel of your struggle to raise your wages and fight for jobs. It's not migrants that shut down factories and lay off people. It's the corporations, you know. So understanding that, then you understand that, you know, it's a fight for your life too.
I think another very important key part of migrant rights that we always tend to forget is that many migrants and immigrants, including white Arabs especially, white Cubans, for example, many different immigrants are always end up having a very similar racism towards the darker people from their country. So, for example, in Egypt, when I was there for like a week, when I was a lot darker, I can't tell you how much shit I got. And it's very true still now, and I'm not even that dark. It's something that we need to make sure that, especially as people of color, we need to stamp out that class separation that we have within our own group, because we can't expect every other group to give us those rights if we are looking at each other as they're completely separate entities. Just like how in Cuba, for example, the Black Cubans are all forecast aware versus the white Cubans who are not as much. Let it out, Alec.
That point is just so salient because it's like, you know, you have this connection between white supremacy and it directly manifests itself in like interpersonal relationships. And my personal experience, you see in the Jewish community too. Like Jews of color are pretty much forgotten. Like literally Ethiopian Jews, Arab Jews, Syrian Jews.
They're excluded from Israel.
They're excluded from literally Jewish discourse in general. Like there's a total absence. Like, and you know, when you think of Tempted to be frank, you think of me with my Cat's Deli hat on. But it's like, there are just so many aspects of our communities that we're forgetting, and it's really based on culture. Like, it just really goes back to. So I just think it's super simple.
There was a time, many, many decades ago,
Not the way up.
there's a test you may have heard of called the paper bag test. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
This is the story they tell. I wasn't there, but this is what they said. there was a paper bag placed on the door of the church. If your skin was darker, that paper bag would. Then there's sort of in the Black community, there's still, it's on a teasy fun level right now. A bit of, I'm gonna say this, playfulness. Nobody doesn't really get too serious. But if you, what's the school Spike Lee did? School Days.
Yeah.
If you might not have seen that movie yet. But it's about Black fraternities and sororities. And there's one group over here that are all light skinned. Another over here that's all dark skinned. And they're at odds with each other constantly. Some of that of what you're speaking of does echo itself in the Black community. I don't think they take it as much seriously now. Every once in a while you hear people laugh and joke about, oh, that's a light skinned. We don't talk to them. But there's a few people that still hold it. And the Black community, we know where that comes from. That's internalized racism.
Yeah.
That comes from years of white supremacy, slavery, traced all the way back to the part where there's a house Negro slave and a field Negro slave, animosity between the two. The house Negro slave got better treatment sometime in a certain way, because they were certainly likely to be shot, killed at any moment, just like the field.
There's some people who argue that the Dreamers are today's house Negroes. I've heard that argument.
How do you feel about that?
I mean, it was a divide and conquer tactic on the part of the ruling class to sort of select the elites and give them some special, but many of the Dreamers, you know, refused to be used that way and still were fighting, you know, for the parents and family members. But, you know, it was to the elites of the immigrants. It was the college educated grouping, you know, so.
I think the Cosecha kind of claims that they came out of the
Right,
Dreamers
right.
group. And they actually having such a hard time organizing themselves right now, because I think especially Democratic Party have a big hold of local communities of migrants, and they're definitely not letting them in, which you witnessed this last couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our big tasks is to break, and I think it's happening more. Like in 2006 or 2008, I remember coming to a demonstration on immigrant rights, and it was huge. It was like several thousand in Washington, and lo and behold, they bring out this huge what do you call it? Screens, huge
Jumbotron.
Yeah, jumbotron, and Obama speaking to the crowd, and I'm like, damn! I'm at a demonstration in Washington with the president of the United States. I was sort of embarrassed, hiding my head, but you know, it was. See, and this is also another reason why the workers' defense committees are so important, because there's got to be rank and file from below pressure on the unions to stop doing this shit. You know, it's like enough. You know, quick depending on the Democrats. You know what they did on DAPL, no DAPL. You know, is a crime. I don't know why we haven't protested that, Sharon Black. I blame you. You're the unionist.
I don't blame knowing them.
Just kidding. She's my girl.
No, I get to talk.
She's my girl. No, I trust your instincts on the labor movement. That's what I mean.
And I actually was. But I'm going to calm myself though. I think the whole question of dreamers and some of the stuff also goes back to what we were saying, like about the workers' defense committees and the importance. When you were telling the story that when you came in around Fresh Direct or people coming in for office, I think because of what people were talking about, it's very critical that revolutionary socialists do this kind of organizing and make the migrant issue very important to us. Because otherwise, it's going to be like the NGO types, the nonprofits, which we're kind of dancing a thin line with them because we do, what Teresa said is very important. I mean, people depend on groups for, day labor associations, for their jobs, for legal services, which is great. We have some legal people that are on the board that are revolutionary. Because we got to be able to do some of this stuff with the workers with a much more honest approach, because we want the whole enchilada, not just a little crumb here and there, which is what sometimes the Philly's doing. But I think that I was reading something, you talk about theoretical stuff. I was reading a whole question of Lenin. And in 1905, one of the things that Lenin did was he was a minority in his own party. And he was fighting tooth and nail to open up the party doors, particularly to workers, and really arguing against people who were sort of like the professional political people who knew everything. And he was fighting really to get working class people into the party in droves. And if he finally succeeded at it, but he went through a hell of a fight. And it's important because it is a difficulty, even with Kosecha, they do strike me as folks, and it's not unusual, both in the working class movement as a whole, not just in the migrant movement, but everywhere, where people who are like the students and the intellectuals, the people who have a little bit more than the others, until there's a bigger movement, sometimes they come forward quicker. So some of those people from Kosecha strike me as, very good folks who come from sort of a better off background than the people they're seeking to serve. But we got to get those workers into revolutionary politics, because it's not like we're living in an age. If Lenin was trying to do it when there was still peasants, our working class is able to it reads and writes. We can get them into our organization. Yeah, we should have had a picket line.
Yeah,
We just
it's
didn't
one
get-
too many.
There's too many stuff that we
That's
just
why we
don't
need
get
to
to do.
recruit. That's why.
But actually,
So that-
What?
that actually brings me to my question. I remember earlier you mentioned that the first day without an immigrant went incredible. And then you mentioned how this year's wasn't as big. One of our hypotheses were that it was pretty much to be out of fear, ICE. This year, I mean, at the end of the day, if there were large droves of immigrants out and migrant workers, I mean, especially with the 4 people we already had arrested, if they get arrested, and the situation will be a lot more dire for them. So how can we inspire somebody, potentially like my brother-in-law, who would be too afraid to go out just out of fear of being deported, to actually go out there and be a revolutionary in politics as well, or be more involved in revolutionary politics? Because I mean, at the end of the day, it's hard to. We can't, at least I know I can't, put myself in their shoes and say, because if I get arrested, worst case scenario, I get a fine and I'm annoyed for the next 2 days. But that's completely different from somebody completely changing their lives by taking a more active role in the struggle.
I mean, we're not gonna pass judgment on what a migrant worker out of status decides, right? I mean, it's their call. All we can do is organize in the case of May Day, it was important to organize a rally that migrants knew was safe, secure, as secure and safe as you can make it, because the cops will do their own thing. No matter what you do, the cops are going to do whatever they want, right? But as organizers, create the public awareness, the press conferences, the leafleting that show this is a well-organized, disciplined, serious demonstration that they can come on to. That's what we can do. The problem was, at least for New York, and I'm sure other places, the immigrant groups that are surviving are the NGO ones, the more progressive left-leaning ones, and there were many, there were many who like the groups that we worked with in our coalition in '06, '07, and '08 were migrants that were Honduran, that were anti-imperialists, that want socialism in Honduras, etc. This is, but they don't necessarily have this resource or strength to keep that front alive. So it's just sort of our work to do that. I think one mistake that we made. It was back and forth, but the Antifa, how do you call it?
It's Antifa or
What?
I don't think there's an official, but I think people tend to go with Antifa.
Antifa sounds really cool. I don't want anybody to say Antifa. Is it actually Antifa?
No, I don't know.
I don't know either. And
Let's think about that.
whatever
It's
they are,
actually Antelope?
The Antelope.
That's actually a really good
they came to May Day in New York, and at first, I'm just gonna be honest. My first reaction was, "Hey, take off the mask for Christ's sake." We've been like fighting in the streets. We're not hiding, And also, when you think of all your sisters and brothers around the world that are, like a human rights lawyer in Colombia is somebody that's willing to die. If he's, what I'm saying, he or she, a trade unionist in Colombia, if he or she in the struggle, or they are in the struggle, they're willing to die, and they don't hide their faces, right? So I had a little bit of like first world privilege attitude towards them. But then I saw them and I talked to a few of them, and then I thought, no, this is good. This is good. They want to kick ass, and they want to hide their faces. All right, so that's cool. The problem, though, is that the migrants don't feel secure with that situation this year. This year they didn't, and people didn't march. The migrants didn't march with us. The ones that came, they didn't march because they were afraid, and sure enough, the cops had an attitude and busted mainly Filipino youth because they were in the front of the march, So I think we have to do things like that and be careful, in our tactics to politically create the conditions to make migrants feel. But sooner or later, in 2006, that fear went away. They weren't frightened in '06, so that will come back.
That actually does raise a good question with me. My initial response to Black Bloc protests were, "Why the fuck are you hiding your face?
Right.
Own up to what you have, or what you believe." But at the same time, Black Bloc protests might be an incredibly useful tool to actually make migrants feel more comfortable. So, for example, what I mean is, say me and Andrew are marching, and then we have another 2 people with us, and those 2 people are, documented. Me and Andrew in this example aren't. If we both have the same appearance, we're both wearing Black Bloc attire, we're covered up. A majority of our skin isn't showing. It gives them less of an opportunity and less of a chance to actually get arrested because they can't be visibly noticed as people of color. And I think Black Bloc has a lot to do with the idea of not putting a face on the movement. It's just everybody looks the same, so it's more of a community thing. I can't tell you too much about it.
So,
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I
You all probably have different opinions.
I love how Andrew's just perfectly leaning on this table while he's explaining this.
My back is starting to hurt.
Oh,
I think there's a lot of it is purely out of security concerns. Like you enter a Black Bloc tactic when you intend to fuck people up, or you want to be prepared to do so. But I don't think that's always going to be the tactic. Like for May Day, the anti-fascist community defense, which we sort of distinguish from an Antifa, we want it to be more open to the masses and not just people who want to block up and fight. But what we did was wear armbands, like distinguishable armbands, and put ourselves at tactical points where police tend to harass people, like at the back, like
Yeah.
towards the front, and that just kind of puts distance between people in the march.
I think, I think that the thing about Black Bloc is that like the ultimate goal of like most Black Bloc protests is property damage. And property damage alone is not enough to make a revolution. In fact, sometimes it can inflame tensions that already exist and cause like more crackdowns and more police repression, you know? Like it's not the end all be all. I think that like the political Comrade Maddie made this really good post on Facebook a couple weeks ago that was like, I feel like property damage and voting should be sort of politically defended in the same way, where we should fight for it, but it's not the end all be all. We can't rely on it entirely. And I like that perspective a lot because at the end of the day, like I get the impetus and the emotion and the reasoning to some extent behind like property damage as a political tactic, but like it doesn't functionally do anything to like throw a trash can through the window other than now the window's broken, you know, like, and now you're all kettled and you're all getting arrested. Like it's not enough on its own, you know. I think that, for example, the property damage that took place during the Freddie Gray riots in Baltimore was really fucking important because it was an expression of like the rage of a community that had been like not laying dormant, but it was, you know, it like rose up, it flared up. I think that like we obviously can't sit around and be liberals and decry property damage as like somehow immoral. That's definitely wrong. But I think I also definitely caution people against like just viewing it as like a net good all the time, always, and we should just do it for any reason. Like a brick through a window isn't always a good thing.
Alec?
So I echo that. The thing is, I've recently forwarded my first experience walking out, and it's like, honestly, the way I'm starting to look at it is like, I kind of agree with your property damage. I think a lot of Antifa, they view it as end be all, and also, you know, they talk about punch the Nazis, but they're really kind of just a bunch of white kids dressing up, and they don't really do it. So like, I'm willing to embrace walking up, but if I'm gonna embrace it, I'm gonna beat somebody up. I'm not like I'm doing it because I'm gonna beat up Nazis for like this.
Yeah, when they beat Richard Spencer,
Yeah,
That was amazing.
so
damn right.
It was so dope.
The issue with them is, and I don't know the competition in New York much, but like I've been looking at them a lot, and like it is usually a lot of white kids
yeah,
who think it's cool to dress up and act like hot shit. And I think there is a way to use the tactic that is really productive. Like I really do. And I think the armbands too. Like I know the tactic really productive. Like there's got to be a way to like kind of synthesize it into like our Marxist perspective without just being like, yeah, like man, I fought the system. I put a brick through McDonald's. Fuck you. Like,
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
dude. Someone's gotta clean that up, you jackass.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
A worker,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, right.
Well.
Yeah.
a worker that's not getting paid much.
Yeah, Howard. Have fun with that glass.
I was engaged in property damage. Mohammed?
So- I agree with you guys. I mean, at the end of the day, property damage, it's cool, but I mean, it doesn't really do much. I mean, at the end of the day, that'll probably just bring money from the city to those businesses to fix it up, or insurance money. So at the end of the day, it's a minor annoyance. But that's why I was kind of posing the idea of using Black Blocs as not just an offensive tool, but rather as a defensive tool. Hence how you were saying it, to synthesize it into a more generally productive way that would make it always a net positive change. Instead of just saying, we broke something, it's we protected somebody, which I think would bring a lot more buy-in and more. That's offensive, but shut up, Alec. We're on the opposite side of the boat from the last meeting now. No, but so what would you guys think about using? I mean, I don't want to say it as just a base protest because I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not masking up in the summer. It gets hot. But I mean, it's a great way to make sure that the people who aren't comfortable with getting caught up in a protest. I mean, think about all the people. I mean, even Alec, your Twitter is anonymous. It's like I don't want to say it out loud, but it's not obviously you. I mean, the same reason why you wouldn't want something to be obviously you is the same reason I might not want to go outside and publicly protest, because out of fear of getting fired, out of fear of reprisal, out of fear of being noticed by like an ICE agent on TV and be like, hey, I know where that guy fucking works now. How would you guys think we could potentially use it as a defensive tool instead? Because I mean, obviously you know how to use it as a defensive tool, but how could we go about implementing it? I mean, especially Andrew, you're.
Oh, we're gonna talk about it.
I just don't call myself. And actually, when I was young, I did do property damage. But I want to put it in a context.
So excited.
No. The reason why is because I think it's a matter of tactical stuff. And in the 60s, there was a very, very strong movement against a war on Vietnam. And young people were in the streets. And I remember being in Chicago in the so-called Chicago Rebellion, which was really the police rebellion against the protesters. And we trashed windows at the time. And we ran in the streets and we did all the other stuff and carried the red flags. And I wouldn't really go into my story, which is a little different but similar. But, so I don't think there's any I would just caution us being too dug in, and I guess I don't want to use the word dogmatic, about these particular tactics. There's times in the movement when property damage can be very, very righteous. There's a thin line between them, and it doesn't really, it's one thing groups that you all are talking about if they elevate it to some kind of principle. I don't know what that's about per se, and I kind of agree. Getting back to the question about how we can defend the migrant community and how migrant workers can feel comfortable about coming out. I think it's a big, big question that has a bigger answer in terms of than just tactical stuff in the street. Though it is important, like if we feel like people that are wearing masks are going to scare off people for whatever reasons, like no matter who they are, then maybe they should wear the mask. And that's what happened with the Antifa movement that Andrew and Alec and Archer are and basically became the defense for the demonstration here locally. But really what needs to happen is more of a political fight. We have to be stronger about, I think, getting to the unions and demanding that they get people out to support the migrant workers. Because if you had people lined up, arm to arm, not masked, but ordinary people ready to defend migrants, then it's likely that the migrant community could feel emboldened to come out. If they knew that people would put their lives on the line, their bodies on the line, so to speak, people will come out. Part of the 4 people getting arrested wasn't a big deal on one level, we all know that, but it was done to show the migrant community here that there's somebody that at least is for you. And in fact, it was a very multinational group. There was somebody representing the Black community, other folks here that a cross-section of people, migrants themselves and Filipino, and then of course Alec was very good, white dude, that was right on. So that was helpful. People really, that was important to the struggle. It really, really, truly was. But I do think we have to broaden. I just want to end by saying one thing, because I know Hannah probably can relate to this. I think there is a problem, and it's partly the Democratic Party, because on the 29th, the climate march folks decided to have this demonstration. Now, years gone by, it was on Earth Day, on the 22nd, that they did the demonstration. This year, they chose a day on the 29th, 2 days before May Day, knowing that May Day was 2 things, frankly. It was the migrant workers, which means the national question and the question against racism, and 2, it's a more militant socialist holiday around the world. So they chose Sunday. And honestly, climate change is a critical problem, and a lot of young people, and I say this not, in any prejudicial way, young white folks, which are good people, come out to these demonstrations, and they could have been more inspired to come out on May 1st. And that's the Democratic Party. They are not stupid.
Yeah.
They are siphoning off the energy, and they are trying to generate and push everybody into this anti-Russian phobia, this whole other direction that they're going in. And then all the major issues, whether they're cutting back Social Security, whether they're going to get ready to talk about slashing even the minimum wages that now stands, entire attacks on all the working class, which is everybody in this room. they're not even paying attention to it. Instead, they're fighting this kind of, I don't even call it, but, horrible bourgeois ruling class war against Trump and blunting class consciousness and doing everything to lead people down a dead end alley. So I think the question is important, and it's like knowing, having a vision for what can be can guide us to get there, even if it's a hard road. And that doesn't mean the black bloc and debates about them could go on forever. We never wore black, and we never put things on when we were trashing windows and screwing up draft boards and shit like that.
I went to a party meeting in Boston last week, and when I arrived at the meeting, there was these three folks with masks and everything, and sticks, big old sticks, and they were like, "We're here to protect you." And I'm like, "Okay, what's happening?"
That's
Nobody
cool.
told me. But they were really cool, and I kind of appreciated it. I mean, so I think it's all different.
As long as we don't have to protect them.
Yeah.
Solidarity, Sharon. Come
No,
on.
no, I know that. I'm just
There we
saying.
go.
What is up with this guy?
I mean, you got Hillary Rodham Clinton saying she's part of the resistance.
Oh,
So-
she's-
She's an activist.
Yeah,
That's
right.
You had your hand
She's my white ally.
I just sort of have a comment on the Antifa group sometimes. I mean, the workers' world, or as a group, we actually have a political, in the Marxist politics behind us. We are kind of all in the same page. But when you see a group of like people with the mask and stuff, we don't know politically they're in the same page. Sometimes some people have like a superhero complexes and want to be vigilantes and all that stuff. So I'm kind of suspicious about it sometimes. But
You mask or not, though, people are gonna let those, complexes come out regardless. Some people are gonna, with or without the mask at the end of the day, one person is gonna either try to resist in a specific way or not. So I feel like wearing the mask doesn't change anything, except maybe they won't get caught. Or what did you mean?
Yeah. I'm for trying to have a working relationship with them politically, so that we can sort of win them to the idea of taking your mask off, and joining the struggle with us. Because, I mean, the time may come when we need to do that, but it's not now, It's not, this is not Palestine, where you,
Right.
it's,
Remember some of the Palestinian marches that we had in the 80s. Some Palestinians, there was a definite reason that they had to wear the copies to cover their face,
we're in Ferguson.
which is quite different. I'm guessing straight down, I'm guessing it's quite different from this other group here that are covering their faces.
It's 9:00 now, and, if people have a couple other questions, especially those who haven't asked, or comments or discussion, we can go on. I mean, Teresa didn't have to get on a train right away, so we can do what we did the last time. I think we ended around 9-ish, I believe. And then Larry stayed and talked to people just individually. We can do that, and also, of course, you want to sum up, feel encouraged. Any other questions or comments? Hannah?
So I know that you mentioned the importance of developing solidarity between the movements against detention of immigrants and against mass incarceration. And I'm wondering tactically how that would happen. Is it a matter of organizing from within the prison system as well as outside and boycott? I'm just wondering.
Yeah. Well, a lot of work has to be done. I mean, we have in New York, this is a good example of the kinds of organizations that can be developed to do that. But we have a long-standing relationship and are very active with the People's Power Assembly in New York, which primarily focuses on the Black Lives Matter issue. And we have meetings with them, we have educationals with them. They come to May Day demonstrations, and we try to bring the immigrant rights movement to Black Lives Matter demonstrations. Like, for example, they're going to have a demonstration on the anniversary of the death of Sandra Bland next month in July. And so the thing to do is to bring literature, bring placards, that sort of make the two connections. And there's been a lot of cases where if there's prison struggles, like there's been a lot of prison struggles in New York. We go there with BLM and immigrant rights placards and discussions, organizing forums where you bring the two struggles together is very important. There's just some examples of trying to do that. The prison system, prison industrial complex is educational on that, highlighting what they do, highlighting what GEO and CCA, it's not CCA anymore, but corporate corporations of America, I forget what they're called, having protests against them and, pointing out that they lock up migrants and they lock up Black and Latino youth, Latinx youth, or some examples,
Andre?
Just wondering, sure, if ICE detains somebody, not going to be kept in central booking, would that be correct to think that? And how do we find out any nearby areas in the metropolitan area or between here and DC that would be a place of detention that ICE uses? Perhaps if we wanted to have a picket line.
They have detention camps, I think. They have full detention camps. I know there's.
Are there any in this area in Maryland?
I know they're in Maryland. It's online.
I know that I was at a workers' rights conference.
Thank you.
Yeah, 2 weeks from now, we'll keep information.
They were talking about, there was some, I don't know if it was CASA.
Your
or
car,
it was a group, Black CASA, and they were talking about how, I don't know for exactly, this was around the time how when I detain somebody, they get that pretty much into it.
Yeah.
These lawyers, you need to try to find these people, and they're all over the damn place. It happens so quickly. So, and they might have a chance to be sentenced here, but
It depends on to what extent county or state or city police cooperate. Yeah. So if you have a county detention center.
Right.
There is
And
like the last-
one other thing that the PPA is going to do in New York is that it's once a week, it's going to go during the day to, what do you call that? Federal Plaza, the detention centers, I'm having a senior citizen moment here. Wherever people are arrested and held and then come out.
Federal and downtown.
Yeah, the jails.
It could be like central booking here.
Yeah, like central booking. And both immigrants, both migrants and poor people that are being arrested come out at the same doors. So we're going to be handing out flyers. And the literature is going to have both, the issue of mass incarceration and broken windows, as well as an appeal to migrants who don't have documentation. So we'll be doing outreach to both. And I think that's, great ways of uniting both struggles.
The other thing, just to call this up, the other thing is we might want to research these private companies that you were referring to, whose names was alluded to me, but seeing if they have any local offices to actually go have a protest.
It's GEO Corporation and formerly CCA. Forgot what it's called now.
Because they're real scumbag operators. And we do have a prisoner solidarity committee now and your party for doing jail solidarity on Saturdays.
This is one of the Howard County.
Howard County, there is a big
Yes, Howard County's
Who
detention
is?
center.
ICE detentions.
We should just try to find out what these places are. Do campaigns. Did you want to say some last words?
No, I love all y'all. It's really great.
And there's cookies here and milk to eat and water
Cookies
for
and
those who
milk.
are lactose. I don't know the words.
I love
And-
that y'all have cookies and milk.
But that's only because of our
You guys had
children.
salted caramel brownies when I came.
So,
It's kind of what I'm happy.
just a reminder, 6:30, there is a free food for the people meeting. And Sunday at 2:00. Oh, Chris, we're not having that stuff because there's a.
Oh, yeah, we're not doing that on Sunday then.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody's invited to New York. All the candidates are invited too. And it's my job, I have to supposed to call out.
Who's coming?
It's about 10:00.
Andrew, Alec, drive up together.
Alec, are you going up to New York?
I didn't.
Pressure.
Alec, I'm sorry.
You were out of town when all this was happening. Glenn, is it?